everybody, and welcome to Machtails from the Cantina Live. Happy Friday to you all. Thank you so much for joining us live, and thank you so much for the people that are watching us on the playback. We got a great show for you tonight. We have a good friend, show producer Matthew Rooney. He's going to be co-hosting us tonight. He'll be my co-host, as well as Craig Miller. Craig Miller is joining the show. Yes, the legendary Craig Miller. Some of you guys might know him from the time that he spent in the Death Star trenches. I cannot do this without the Patreon support, so I thank you guys for not only producing the show at the producer level, but also the people that are getting the podcast, the Inside the Vault segments on the past movie projects that I've done, and all that. Tyler Page has the night off tonight. I was with him at Rogue One last night. Gave me this really cool beer, the Umpire Strikes Back. It's a baseball Star Wars mashup, so it's perfect for my fandom. Speaking about fandom, Craig Miller is going to be joining us on the show in just a couple minutes, and we're going to talk to him not only about his time in the trenches, but also we're going to talk about Solo tonight. Why Solo in the middle of an Andor countdown? Because I've been talking a lot about Rogue One. That's why. For those of you that are familiar with the tin, Patreon member names will get drawn at the end of the show. You get a prize. You got to be tuning in live. And the drinking word of the night. Be sure to be 21, drink responsibly. Solo. Every time you hear the word solo, drink whatever you're drinking along with us. Remember, drink responsibly. Without further ado, I want to bring on show producer and co-host Matthew Rooney. Matthew, thank you so much for taking time out of your day. Hopefully this isn't turning into work for you at this point.
Hey, chut choo choo. Hey everybody. No, it's not work at all. I'm very happy to be here. I've been having a blast doing stuff behind the scenes, putting content together for your Patreon audience, and I'm here to talk about Solo. I have my dice with me that I got from Galaxy's Edge in 2019, so I'm raring to go.
Nice. Well, thank you for all your contributions to the show, and thank you for taking the helm tonight. You're making it feel like we're flying more than half a ship. But without further ado, I want to bring on the guest of the evening, Craig Miller. It's Miller time, baby. Craig, welcome to the show.
Hey, how are you doing, guys?
I am good, man. I am looking forward to the weekend, even though I'm working tomorrow. But I cannot thank you enough, Craig, not only for what you did a long time ago, but for accepting the invitation at such a short last-minute notice. Dan was going to join the show this weekend, but I want to give a shout-out to Dan Matson and his father. I wish him well. His father is ill, and our thoughts and prayers are with Dan and the challenges that are involved with all that. So, Craig, you've been on a lot of shows. You've been on Rebel Force Radio before. You've been on Skywalking Through Neverland. I know you've done I know you were a publicist back in the day. I know you've been interviewed a lot. I want to do something with you this evening, my friend. If you feel comfortable with it, we do this thing called the Mind Probe Questionnaire, and it's a chance for people to get to know Craig Miller a little bit more than all the hard work and talent that you did, not only on your IMDb list of credits and Star Wars, but do you feel comfortable with having the fan base get to know you a little bit more?
Sure.
Well, it is the Mind Probe, so it is a little intimidating, but I'm going to start with one that I'm a big music fan. What was your first concert that you've attended?
Oh gosh. I think it was an Elton John concert back when he was a new singer. Back, in the early mid 70s.
Now, I know you're out in the West Coast now. Are you from California?
Yeah, no, I'm born and raised in LA.
Born and raised in LA. Did you ever get a chance to find yourself at the Fillmore in San Francisco?
No.
Never made it up. Never made it up that far.
Yeah, no.
Elton John as your first concert.
I've never been to a concert at the Fillmore.
You know, Elton John as your first concert, that's a pretty good one. He had a really long career. Something that he shares with you in a different level. You know, he's tied with the Muppets. You're tied with Sesame Street, so there is a connection there. Matthew, you got one for.
I also worked with the Muppets. I worked on both the Dark Crystal and the Muppets Take Manhattan.
Yes, that's right. Every time I think of the Muppet Show, I forget about all the other masterpieces. Yeah, the Dark Crystal, Muppets Take Manhattan. Those were amazing. Matt, you got a question for him.
Yeah, I do. I have a Sesame Street related question, actually, since you produced an episode and were there. If you could hang out with a Sesame Street character, who would it be and why?
Oh, sure. Well, there's a lot of them, and some are more interesting than others. Boy, certainly Big Bird is great. I actually got to spend a bunch of time with Big Bird, both the characters, since we did those 5 segments with R2 and 3PO, and he was in 2 or 3 of them, I forget. And also Carol Spinney, who was a terrific guy. So he was good to spend time with as well.
Yeah, Carol Spinney, of course, passed away not too long ago. And I do want to give a shout out to our good friends at Skywalking Through Neverland, Richard and Sarah. You just did a nice podcast episode for them where you got in detail about your time working on the Sesame Street show. So I do want to tell people to check that out. Again, I don't want to do a copy and paste on what some of my friends out there have done. Craig, here's a question for you: baseball or football?
Well, I'm not much of a sports guy at all, but of the two, baseball.
Okay, baseball. Would you say you're a Dodgers fan because you grew up in the area?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I think it's kind of weird in a way that people are fans of a team because they're from where they grew up, as opposed to something about the team. But yeah, I guess we all are. And I used to go to Dodger games, especially when I was a kid. They moved out to California and Chavez Ravine. And I used to go there when I was, 10, 12 years old. And, like I say, I'm not a huge sports fan, but of any team, probably the Dodgers.
I think it's cool that you say it's kind of strange that people like the baseball teams of the towns that they grew up, in, aside from, let's say, something special about the team. Because I am born and raised in the suburbs of Chicago, and I am a huge fan of the Tampa Bay Rays simply because they have no money and they have all this talent and they compete year after year. So there's something special about that team that I like. And here I am thinking, I don't know why the rest of the world isn't a Rays fan, because nobody's from Florida, really.
Yeah.
We're going to be talking about Solo in a little bit, but Han or Luke, who was the character that you loved when you saw that original trilogy back so many years ago?
Han is a great character, but do you really relate to him? Luke is much more, the kind of, not that I grew up on a farm, moisture or otherwise, but, kind of young and want to do something and want to get out and make your mark. And that's a much more kind of relatable character for me than, the cool, laconic, rogue smuggler kind of guy.
You know, it's funny because I went through a period where I was relating to Luke. And then, of course, when I find myself in trouble, and I don't do a lot of shady things for a living, but when I find out, and when I'm in a conversation with my wife and I have to get myself out of the mess that I've gotten into, I can relate to the Han Solo character in those kind of situations.
Yeah.
You know, but yeah, Luke, like you said, Luke is definitely a more relatable character. Now, Craig, you worked as a director of fan relations from 77 to 80. Your IMDb credit list is very, very long as writer, producer. If you had a time machine, and could travel to any year, but you had to live the rest of your life there, you know, what year would you go back to?
Oh boy, that's a hard question. You know, I gotta say, 1979 was a great year for me. You know, working on Empire Strikes Back, spending 3 or so weeks at the studio on the set of Empire, producing Sesame Street, doing all kinds of stuff. That was really a great time. I mean, I've had great times in great places, have had, you know, a lot of things that I'm very happy with, but hard to beat that in a lot of ways.
Yeah, do you have a favorite film from that original trilogy?
You know, I always say it's hard for me to judge between Star Wars and Empires. Empire, I think, in so many ways, is actually a better film. But without Star Wars, there wouldn't be an Empire.
Right.
Without all the groundwork that George did in Star Wars, you know, Larry Kasdan and Kirsch wouldn't have had the time to explore those characters in the depth he did and to bring out those elements that made it as good a movie as it is. So it for me, it's really hard to say, but if I had to pick one, it would be Empire.
Do you have a favorite movie from the sequel trilogy?
Oh, from the sequel trilogy, I don't know. I actually like the sequels. I don't think they're great movies. I think they all have problems of one sort or another. You know, I know there are a lot of people who hate the sequels, and I don't think that's. I mean, everyone's entitled to their opinion, but I think they're a lot better than that. I just think they're not as good as the original trilogy. It's like going off to the gambling planet made no sense under the circumstances. It was a perfectly fine set piece on that planet, but it didn't add anything to the movie. We didn't really need it. We didn't need to meet the Benicio del Toro character because he doesn't do anything. He felt like he was just there to set him up to be in the next movie, but then he's never in the next, you know, doesn't do anything in the next movie. So, you know, you cut that 30-40 minute sequence out. I don't think the movie loses anything. I think they were good movies. They were entertaining. They just weren't great movies.
Matthew, speaking about that, and you know, Craig, I remember when I invited you on the show and I wanted to talk about Solo. You said, "You know, I didn't work on Solo," and I said, "Yes, I know, but you've worked on so much." And if somebody like yourself, I always appreciate the input and the perspective that you have on these. Matthew, you have a question that's kind of relatable to that.
Well, you know, you've worked as a writer on television series. You wrote an episode of The Smurfs, I believe, and several episodes of Curious George.
I've got about 300 mostly animation credits.
That's fantastic.
300. That's a long list.
Yeah.
So if you had the opportunity to write an episode of one of the current Star Wars streaming series, which one would you most like to write for and why?
Oh, gee, that's hard. Clone Wars was pretty great. Um, I really didn't think any of those shows were bad. Um, I would have loved to work on any of them. Would still love to work on any of them. No one's ever asked me to work on any of them. But I think they've done such a good job. I've got friends who've written episodes on those shows. Um, and I think they've done a great job of extending and continuing the Star Wars universe. I'm not sure I could pick one in particular that I want to be on more than another.
Is there a character on any of them that you'd like to write? Maybe like the Mandalorian or Kenobi, or do any of those stick out for you?
Yeah,
like with Andor coming out as well,
yeah. I got to say, I'm not that big a fan of Mandalorian. I mean, I thought we had been talking about the animated ones, but the live action ones, I really liked Obi-Wan. I thought that was good. I'm looking forward to seeing Andor. Mandalorian, I thought was kind of okay. It looks great. The first few episodes were interesting, but then it kind of just sort of stood there and felt like it was floundering, trying to figure out where the story was going to go. So, I mean, it looked great. It was interesting, but I didn't think Mandalorian was the best series.
One more question about about music for the Mind Probe questionnaire. Is there one album that what album would you listen to for the rest of your life? You have one album to choose. What record would that be?
Are you talking about Star Wars, or are you talking about?
We're bouncing We're bouncing between Star Wars and music here. That's what the show likes to roll on. But yeah, going back to music.
Well, my musical tastes are reasonably broad, but kind of old fashioned. I'm not a rap guy. I think one of the best albums I've ever heard, considering the entire album, not just individual cuts, was like Carole King's Tapestry album, which is one of the top selling albums of all time in music. It's kind of out of date and not to a lot of modern tastes, but it's an album I always loved.
Well, see, you know what? That's the thing. You were old when you were in your age in that era was some of the best music. I'm a huge aficionado of the late '60s music and all through the '70s. My parents raised me on great music, so it doesn't matter how popular it is now or how unpopular it is. Some of the best music came from that era.
Yeah, I mean, I love a lot of that, but I can spend time listening to old jazz albums. I like Broadway shows. I like all kinds of stuff. Just maybe not some of the latest music is maybe I'm too old for it, or just not my taste.
No, it's just not that good. that's how I look. Jazz or classical? Do you prefer one or the other?
I'm more of a jazz than classical.
More jazz or classical. Yeah, I just went to Jazz Fest in my hometown here in the suburbs of Chicago last weekend, and nothing beats jazz. I know September was Jazz Festival month. There's a lot of different festivals putting on jazz music in the month of September. Last question for the Mind Probe is 5 words. What 5 words sum up the rest of your life? Can you do that in 5 words?
5 words to sum up the rest of my life. I hope things get easier.
You hope things get easier. Yeah, I love it. Well, hey, I hope you feel as comfortable as you did before we did the Mind Probe questionnaire. I just wanted to get some friends to get to know you a little bit deeper than just Star Wars and all your writing and producing credits. Now, one thing I wanted to talk about was Solo. The film Solo was. My friend Jimmy Mack declined my invite from Rebel Force Radio tonight to be on the show because he did not want to talk about anything negative. And he does not care for the film Solo. And I feel like between social media, the sequels, and maybe what Solo has done to some of the fans, created the Red Sea for Star Wars fandom. Did you see, because of your involvement with Bantha Tracks and all that back in the day, did you see any negativity from the fans back then? Because it is hard for us to picture a world without social media, and I think social media kind of makes things negative. How was it back then when it came to fans that were disappointed?
Well, the internet has been a great blessing and a curse. And one of the things that's great about it is we can all talk to each other so much more easily, not just talk, but, writing on web pages and blogs and everything else, as well as things like we're doing now. But it acts as a megaphone. And Simon Pegg just said that Star Wars has the most toxic fans. And I'm not sure that's true. There certainly are toxic fans in Star Wars fandom, but I think they're toxic fans in a lot of things. We had, back in the 70s and 80s, there were certainly people who didn't like things they didn't like Star Wars or whatever. We got complaints about Empire. You didn't have the internet. You didn't have it so that you could see everyone, and everyone was, you said this, and then, eight of your friends got on and said, yeah, that's true. And all that kind of stuff. It isn't being amplified the way it is here. And there are a lot of people on the internet, not just in Star Wars, who like the attention. They like to cause a fuss. They like to stir the pot. So they say stuff. They say, stuff to get a rise out of people, and they like the attention it brings. And, you didn't have that ease. People were always like that, but you didn't have the ease of getting a reaction the way you do now. But we got complaints. Some of the same complaints that the sequels got, we got on Empire. People complained there was too much humor in Empire. They, like there hadn't been humorous moments in Star Wars. We got a complaint that I don't mean a complaint, but some people complained that why was Yoda a hermit? Why would a Jedi be a hermit? But Ben Kenobi was a hermit, and they made the same complaint about Luke Skywalker in the sequels. Why was Luke a hermit? Well, every Jedi we've met was a hermit. They'd all gone off and said, I'm not going to be around other people for one reason or another. So, I mean, they were complaining about the thing that was prevalent in every Jedi. Why would a Jedi do that? I don't know, but they all do.
It's a prerequisite to become a Jedi.
It's a storytelling contrivance, really, to get them off isolated somewhere. But, it's those sorts of things that people were complaining about on Empire, which now everyone says is great and was the best Star Wars movie and yada, yada, yada. And today, would anyone complain about the amount of humor in Empire? I don't think so. Uh,
Right.
you know,
Now, when people were complaining, were they complaining like through letters too?
they were complaining in letters. They were complaining in fanzines. If we would do a lot of convention appearances, not just the huge conventions like today, but I would go to, you know, 20, 30, sometimes 40 conventions in a year and do presentations. And, we did exhibits, we did all kinds of things back then. And I'd hear from fans about, what they thought about Star Wars and Empire and what they liked, what they didn't like, questions they had, so we were hearing it. It just wasn't at the volume and it wasn't where everyone on earth could see it at the same time.
Yeah, like you said, it wasn't as amplified, and it's times are different, but it's still back then. It was still part of fandom. Now,
Can I ask a side question really quick, Chris?
yeah,
Craig, you mentioned that nowadays Empire is the favorite, and I had asked this. I was talking to Chris about this a couple of months ago. When do you think that transition occurred? Like did that happen as soon as the film came out in 1980? Did it happen in the 80s or 90s? Would you say, from your perspective, when did Empire become the favorite?
I think I think it became a favorite pretty quickly. I'm not sure it. I think when it first came out, I don't know if people were saying it. If the majority were saying it was better than Star Wars, a lot of people reacted to it being a deeper type of storytelling, but there were also complaints that it doesn't have an ending. It ends as George said when I talked to him about it while we were making it. He said it's the second act of an opera. People just have to wait for the third movie for the ending. Star Wars, on the other hand, has an ending. It isn't an ending of the war, but it's an ending. It has an emotional ending. Ta-da! We've conquered the Death Star, so it feels like an ending. Empire leaves us hanging. So there were people who were upset about that, and so, but I think probably by the late 80s, and of course after 83, who knew when there was going to be, if ever there was going to be another Star Wars movie. So I think by the late 80s, I think there was a pretty good consensus that it was the best movie. But there are always people who like another, Star Wars or Jedi the best. And then once the prequels came out, the prequels seemed to be more popular with people who were in their, teens and 20s, and of course younger when they first saw it, than people who had seen the original trilogy and now were in their 30s and 40s when they saw the prequels, because the prequels were much more aimed at the younger audience.
now going on a solo as a writer, from a writer's standpoint, and again, your comments are so valid because you have all this experience of all these years, writing and producing.
So many years.
Yeah, so many years. Well, it's different too than a vocal fan hiding behind their keyboard.
Well, I really do mean this, that everyone's entitled to their honest opinion.
Yeah.
It's like, do you like spinach? Do you like chicken? Your taste and my taste may be different. As long as you're doing it based on you're thinking about it and not just a knee-jerk reaction. I might come to it. I don't mean this to be superior, in a more educated or experienced way, being able, not because I'm smarter or better or anything, but I've spent so much time analyzing stories.
Sure.
that I can point at things as to why I'm reacting in ways that maybe someone who hasn't spent that time trying to figure out, they know they're reacting to the story. They may not know what about the story they're reacting to. And that's not a superiority, that's just a practice kind of thing. Again, everyone's taste is valid for themselves. But yeah, there are definitely things that I like Solo as a movie. I enjoyed Solo when I watched it. Um, I I think there are things that could be improved in it. Overall, though, I really enjoyed it. I had a good time, and that's really what counts. Did you have a good time watching it? Did you enjoy it? Did you get anything from it?
What was your first? My first reaction when I saw the film was, I think I still had a Rogue One hangover because Rogue One I loved so much, and I felt like it
Rogue
raised
One
the
is
bar.
great. Rogue One, I think Rogue One's a better movie than Solo.
Oh, yes. Well, my producer Brandon Wolgast, who's not joining us on the show tonight, he puts this up there right with Rogue One. And like you said, do you like spinach? Do you like chicken? Do you like jazz? Do you like classical? It's okay, but we don't want to go on the internet and start just trash talking a bunch of things, like you said, Craig, without thinking about it and without giving it some thought, just to get a rise.
Yeah. Well,
I think
here's my thought. A couple thoughts on Solo. Once you're doing it, yes, you've got to do that fan service stuff of origin. How did But I think they took that too far. Did we really need to know how Han got his blaster? Did we even know that he had one blaster that he carried with him all this time? That never crossed my mind. I thought he was a guy who just used whatever weapon was handy.
right.
He had a blaster, but there wasn't an emotional, connection to it. So I thought they kind of played that too much. They tried to explain too many different things to give the fans that background information. We needed some. We wanted to know how he and Chewie met. We wanted to know some stuff, but other stuff just seemed to be too much.
Do you think they did that to kind of fill the time as part of the storytelling?
I don't think they did it to fill the time. Larry Kasdan and his son, who I'm sorry, I'm forgetting his
Jonathan.
son. I'm sorry,
Jonathan.
Jonathan, right? The Writers Guild of America did a screening of Solo, and Larry and Jonathan spoke afterwards and talked about it, and talked about a lot of their decision-making process and stuff. And it was very interesting to hear them and how they felt about it. I was certainly not to fill the time, but they also felt an obligation to tell Han's backstory. I just think they filled too many bits of the backstory that we didn't need to know. I also thought, while it was a fun movie, I don't feel the need. Gosh, now I want to see more adventures of Han and Chewie, because it felt like, okay, I know what these guys are like and what every adventure would be like. I wanted to see more story. If they were going to do a sequel to Solo, I wanted it to be about Kira. She was the interesting character who looked like she would have an interesting journey ahead of her. Han and Chewie were just going to go on, smuggling adventures and having a good time and romancing women and stuff until we met them in Star Wars. So it didn't make me feel I wanted to know more about them when that movie was over. But Kira was the interesting character to come out of it.
From it's funny because you have Solo, and yeah, if there was a sequel, it'd be good to show that character more. If you look at Obi-Wan Kenobi, right? It's called Obi-Wan Kenobi, but it's also about Princess Leia.
And I love that little the girl who played the young Princess Leia.
Yeah,
I thought
Vivian.
she was
Yes,
terrific.
yeah. She was fantastic. Is there a character that you is there a is there a movie that you would like to see based on a character that we haven't seen yet from the old from the OT
Oh, from the original trilogy.
or even the prequel trilogy
Yeah.
for that matter?
Um,
Or is
Yeah.
is there such a thing as too much Star Wars?
you know, I wasn't on it, but I just put 2 weeks ago was Long Beach Comic Con here in Southern California, and they asked me to put together a few panels for them. And one of the panels I put together, although I wasn't on, was "Is there too or can there be too much Star Wars?"
Yeah. Well, what is your answer?
Can there be? Sure. Have we had enough? No. We could. I think we could have more. I think it just has to be judicious. You know, it's
Yeah.
we don't need a series about every character who is ever in a Star Wars movie. Um, some seem more interesting than others. Some of them seem to have, a deeper backstory, a life that's separate from what we've seen in the Star Wars movies. So you could certainly do a Porkins movie. How did Porkins get to be in? But I don't know that there's a lot of just because you could doesn't mean you should. I'm trying to think of who was in the original trilogy who would make a good movie. We've certainly seen plenty of Ewoks.
Yeah, especially with the animated series. Now, were you a fan of the animated series, or were you too busy writing for other animated shows?
Yeah, I was just getting into writing, and I started writing animation in 1986. So that sort of was right as Ewoks was being done, right at that period. But I was brand new at that point. I think the show's okay. The two shows. Obviously, they're skewed young, which you would imagine with Ewoks. And I think we've kind of explored where as much Ewoks as maybe, despite I have friends who were Ewoks at various times. I'm not sure we need more. I'm not sure we need more Ewok movies. But you never know. If someone can come up with a good story to tell, that's always the important thing. To me, story is character. It has to be about people. It has to be about someone, and it doesn't matter if they're an Ewok or a Martian or an anthropomorphic goat. It's got to be about a character, a person, and their emotional journey through a set of circumstances.
Did you have a favorite character from Solo? I know you said you were a big fan of the other character of Kira.
Kira of any character in that, probably Kira. She was to me the most interesting.
Was there anything that you would have done differently about Solo the film?
Well, other than not explaining quite so much about Han's backstory, I mean, that's a hard thing to say. Certainly, it's hard to argue with Larry Kasdan and his take on the Star Wars universe. Larry has been involved with more of it as a creator than pretty much anybody.
Sure.
Other than George, and you know, every writer would make different choices. You know, if we'd all make the same choices, you only need to hire one writer and have them write everything. You know, the reason you have multiple writers on a TV series is you want different takes within the established universe of that show, whether it's a Star Wars show or, you know, a detective show. You want to have people explore different things. When I when I'm hiring writers for a show I'm running, um, I'm looking for people who will bring something to it other than the stories I would tell, who have different life experiences, have different philosophies and ways of approaching the world and their characters. And so everyone would tell it differently, some slightly differently, some very differently. Um, and so would I do anything different in Solo? Probably. I might not have done. I probably wouldn't have done as good a job as Larry and Jonathan. They've got, you know, Larry's knowledge of the universe.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I would have done some things differently. They might have been some individual things might have been better. Maybe, who knows? Um, but that's just the way, you know, writing goes. It doesn't spring full blown. You're As you go, the story evolves, and you come up with things as you tell it. But Solo is a good movie. I really enjoyed Solo.
Well, it's funny. I think with movies, if you're not a writer and you're a fan, it reminds me, going back to the sports analogy. You know, there's all these sports fans that like to play armchair quarterback, and there's also all these movie fans and Star Wars fans that have a better idea or a better way of doing things. And it's hard to argue with Lawrence Kasdan, or it's hard to argue with Dave Filoni, or John Favreau, or George Lucas. It's like those are the people that know the story the best. And if they're doing something that you don't like, then maybe, you know, I don't know. What do you do? You tell them to go make a movie of their own?
You know, everyone's right and everyone's wrong. You know, you may not like something, but the movie that got made was the movie that got made. Now, movies get remade all the time. Going back to an old movie, you know the movie The Maltese Falcon,
Yes.
the Humphrey Bogart detective movie, considered one of the best movies of all time. That's the third version of that story. That's the third version made in a period of 10 years. You know, so people thought, this is a good story. Let me tell it differently.
Do you think that Star Wars, the original trilogy, will ever be redone in the next 50 to 100 years?
Now that Disney owns it, probably. Maybe. Disney certainly has shown no compunction to not remake even their most classic works. And, you know, and that's, you remake things. I think the best thing is to remake movies that didn't work, that were good ideas that didn't quite work, and see if you can make them take that idea and make it work. Yeah. But a lot of people remake things because, hey, we own it, so we don't have to pay anyone for the rights. People already know the property, so it's easier to market it, and we can make more money off of it because people won't go see an old movie if we release it in the theaters. At least not in the numbers who will go see it if it's a brand new movie. So yes, studios remake movies all the time. In some cases to make the idea better. In a lot of cases, just to make more money. In 50 years, would Disney remake Star Wars? I think if the world is similar to the way it is now, yeah, absolutely, they'd remake it just because it's a way to bring money into the corporation. Would they make it better? Sometimes you make things again because the tastes of the world are different or the philosophies are different. But other times, you know, it's just a way to make some more money. So,
and we know Disney and the rest of the world are good at wanting to do that.
Yeah, well, Universal remade Psycho. That didn't work out as a financial hit, but that was certainly what they were trying. The movies get remade all the time, just the same way Broadway shows get revived all the time.
Sure.
Well,
a lot of people say that A New Hope was remade, and that was called The Force Awakens.
Yeah.
Because you've been involved in Star Wars in such a long time, especially going back to fandom, is there one thing that you miss from the early days of fandom that cannot be found in this era of fandom?
I'll tell you what I don't like about this era of fandom, and it's not unique to Star Wars by any means, but it's the gatekeepers who seem to think they get to judge who's allowed to be a fan. We saw that in comics in the comics fandom, when the whole thing like, oh, how could a girl be a fan of comics? And we get that a lot in Star Wars as well, and in other areas where, oh, you couldn't really be a fan. And that gatekeeping, if someone's a fan, they're a fan. They may not be the exact same fan you are. They may know it better. I remember with Star Trek fandom in the 60s and 70s, there were a lot of women in fandom, probably maybe even the majority who actually came to conventions and did things were women. Star Wars had a lot of women as fans in the early years. The idea that, and while it is, a lot of it is women can't be real fans. There's also, someone will show up and everyone wants to ask them questions and test them, like, are you a real fan?
Right.
It's like, who says you get to decide who?
Yeah.
If I like something, I like something.
And
if I want to be around other people who like it, and maybe I don't know as much about it as you do, well, maybe by hanging out with you, I could find out more.
Yeah.
But if you're going to say you only are going to allow in people who are already experts, then you're saying I want this fandom to die, because you're only going to have all those fandom, old time fans are going to start going away one way or another. So it's the gatekeeping, and we did have it in the old days, but it wasn't to the extent, and it wasn't as bad. And part of that is the fault of the internet being a megaphone.
Sure.
But it does seem to be a lot of people are getting reinforcement for that attitude. So that's a difference I'd like to see, is if someone wants to be a fan, let them be a fan.
Amen.
What do you think about?
Yes.
I'd like to ask a solo question really quick. What do you think about Alden Ehrenreich's performance as Han Solo in the Solo film?
I think it's good, and I think what a lot of I'm sorry, who you're
sorry, Alden Ehrenreich, who played Han Solo.
Right. Suddenly a picture of the character.
Threw you off with that photo of his
I think he did a good job, but I think what's confused a lot of people is a lot of people were expecting him to play Harrison Ford as Han Solo, but younger. And that's not who he is in Solo. In Solo, he's a teenage guy who's going to grow up to be Han Solo. He's going to grow up to be the Harrison Ford character, but he hasn't developed that personality yet. He's still becoming that guy. He's becoming that cynical. He's becoming that. And I think if you look at it that way, and I talked to Larry about this, and that was the attitude they were going for. He isn't Han Solo yet. Because remember, he even gets the name Han Solo in this movie. He's becoming that character. He isn't that guy yet.
It's a prequel.
Yeah, well, yeah, it is. And
You know?
and you can see the vestiges, that maybe not vestiges isn't the right word, but the seedlings, the beginnings of that character and how he's growing into that personality. And I think looking at it that way, I think he did a really good job. But if you want him to already be Han Solo, that isn't what he was trying to do. That isn't what he was guided towards doing. And so, yeah, as that, it's not a good performance, but that isn't what he was trying to do.
Right. Oh, I think that's really well said. Because I think some of the people that were disappointed with it, like you said, were expecting a young Harrison Ford like Han Solo, but this was before that story.
Right.
Told by somebody that was there, from the beginning, pretty much.
Yeah.
Fandom gets really, really complicated. When I first saw this movie, I did not like it. I gave it a second watch because, I wanted to. First of all, how many times have we only seen one Star Wars movie once? We always watch it 30, 40, 50 times. So the third time, this film is growing on me. And I feel like it's going to be something that I'm going to enjoy for years, Craig, I know your time is limited. I want to thank you for joining us on the show. It was a little bit of a last minute thing, but thank you for making us, put it together, helping us put it together. I do want to talk really briefly about this. I should have given you the proper introduction because I always assume that everybody knows who everybody is. But for those of you that don't know Craig Miller, my introduction to him would be, think of Steven Sansweet and Dan Madsen, but he's the prequel of those guys.
Yes, in some ways.
And you're kind of both of those guys in one because they both had their role. But back when you were doing it, like you were literally in the trenches doing both of them together. So I should have started your introduction like that, but I'm making that as part of the outro. Where can people get your book? Is Amazon the only place, or is there?
No, the book is published through Amazon, so that's the easiest place to get it.
Okay, it's published through Amazon.
It's published through Amazon. It's also available through BarnesandNoble.com, and of all places, it's on Walmart.com. I don't think you'll find it in Walmart stores, but it is available through Walmart if you want to get it there. People can buy it from me if they want a signed copy, but the book isn't more expensive, but it's more expensive to ship.
I got mine signed right there.
There you go.
I got the. You know what? It's funny because I bought I got your 8x10 autograph of this. And what I loved about it was not only are you standing in front of the Falcon, but you had like 1979 autograph pricing. Everybody's charging $100 now for an autograph. And then I went back and I bought the book because the book and the photo together, it was such a steal. So I appreciate you keeping it reasonable for the fans instead of raking people over the coals,
Well, it's also that people love photos and autographs of actors. I want people to read my book. I want people to enjoy the book. I don't really believe anyone wants my autograph that badly. They want to have it on the book, but so I don't charge for the autograph. If you buy the book, and occasionally people want to buy a copy of the photo of me and the Falcon, and the signature isn't additional. That's just part of it.
what was the funnest part about doing the book, and what was the most challenging part about doing the book? And that'll be my last question for you.
Okay, well, I mean, for 40 years, people had been saying to me, you've got all these stories about Star Wars. You should write a book. And I was like, thanks. I like telling these stories, but I didn't believe I had a book's worth of stories. But
what you do?
Yeah, it turned out when I actually finally sat down and started writing, because I thought, 50,000 words. 50,000 words is a book. If I have something like 50,000 words, I'll do it as a book. And well, the final book is 110,000 words. So I guess I had a lot of stories. And, it was fun remembering them. It was fun telling them in a more thought out way than you do if you're just sitting and talking to someone. And I got together with a few old friends from the day and asked them to help me remember some of it. And, it was a great time. I wrote a book that I thought fans would find interesting, that I would have found interesting if it was me, just the same way when I wrote all the issues of Bantha Tracks in the early years. I wrote it for me. I wrote it, what would I want to know in a language I'd want to hear it in? It wasn't written for little kids. It wasn't written, and I wanted to tell stories that people wouldn't have heard anywhere else. They didn't need me to tell them how they made lightsabers look or how they did, the land speeder look like it's floating. There are plenty of books that told that story. So it's all stuff that people wouldn't know about the making and marketing and fandom of Star Wars from the period, except from either talking to me or reading the book. And so that's what I intended to do. And I've been very gratified. The last time I looked, it was 87% 5-star reviews on Amazon, which I found astounding.
Right. That's always a good thing, right?
Right. Yeah. People are always complaining about something. So I've been very fortunate. I've been very lucky. People seem to really like it. I'm very happy about that. Please tell their friends. Please buy more copies. It's
absolutely, man. I highly recommend this. Again, Amazon. Craig Miller, thank you so much for joining us. Have a wonderful weekend. I appreciate you. I appreciate your time, man.
Okay, thank you, guys. I love being on here.
We'll have you on again, man. Take care. Have a good weekend.
Okay.
Best to your wife as well. Best to your wife as well. Thank you. Man, what a special treat that was, man. Such a special treat having him on. It's funny. We were going to talk about Solo tonight, and but when you have a guest on like Craig Miller, you have to go, outside the box a little bit, right?
Yeah. What else can you do? You got to go. You just have to talk to him about all that stuff.
No, and you know what? I want to thank everybody for tuning in live tonight. And I got to give a shout out to Brandon Wargast again. Brandon, you not only are a producer, but you're very involved. You sent this email to me, and it could only be best read in your words. So I'm going to save that, and we're going to talk about Solo again because there's been so many people that wanted to be on tonight's show that couldn't. It's a busy weekend for people. So we're going to do Solo Part 2. We're going to do an appropriate round table because, like I said, man, when you have a guest on the show, especially like Craig Miller, man, you gotta give him the spotlight. You have to. There's no other way around it, So we're going to do a sequel. Maybe Solo 2 won't get made. We're going to do we are going to do a sequel to this show. Now, I'm going to send everybody out with, Matthew, if you don't mind playing the Robert Hines soundtrack back there, I'm going to do the Patreon name draw here. And again, guys, thank you so much for your support on Patreon. Rich Brendel was tuning in live. Let's see, I pulled out. I must have the drinking words mixed up with the Patreon names because I just pulled out Ewan McGregor's name. Glenn Nelson. Glenn Nelson writes all the music, but he never has the time to watch us live. All right, I'm only going to do 3. So, John Drake, a Nerf Herder Council. I watched his show last night, but he's not watching my show tonight. But he's supporting at the 1138 tier. If you have the 1138 tier, you get a happy hour chat with me. You also get the Inside the Vault segments from yesteryear and the current film projects I'm working on now. Boston Dan's been supporting the show for a long time. And the last one is Sharon Sandoval. Sharon Sandoval has been busy binge watching and binge listening content on Patreon, but she doesn't seem to be tuning in live. Again, it's a very, very busy weekend for everybody. Thank you to my show producer, my friend, my co-host, and for asking for good questions tonight, Matthew Rooney. Thank you again to Craig Miller. Craig Miller, Star Wars Memories of My Time in the Death Star Trenches. It's a good read. It's a really, really good read. And there's pictures in there as well on Amazon, published by Amazon. Thank you to all my other show producers. And we will catch you guys next time on Mocktails from the Cantina, another round. The show tomorrow with John Tenuto has been postponed until October. I got to work my real job tomorrow. But maybe if I get enough Patreon members, I will be able to quit my day job or at least cut back on some time. Hey, we'll catch in with you guys next time. Choo-choo, choo-choo. So long, everybody.